The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert, as tempting as it was to explore ancient mysteries. There was a war going on, and also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Lapino. Apparently, the Mad Rabbit had sold a Pegasus that he did not exactly own. Lapino always wiggled out of trouble, given time. But he was out of time. Lapino's frantic message said that the Ravens were going to kill him for being a rebel spy. And that he had a clever plan. If the fleet reached him first, they'd string him up for that. Never mind the winged horse. Or so Lapino had told him over the far speaker anyway. Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen a winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the Ravens? People were frightened these days. Just 2 weeks past, Renato had sneaked through an empty town and listened to the Ravens call about the Emperor's new taste in ritual sacrifice. Renato looked around the empty village and reflected. The Sky Ripper had turned out to be far too dangerous to be used. Time to turn to what he knew best. Ooh, wouldn't his gauntlet look swell with that jewel in it? gem of power. Ooh, he didn't find those every day. Think of all the artisans he was creating employment for. Truly, he was a job creator. Hey, did you guys ever learn to swing dance? Oh, well, too late. Ravens were landing everywhere. The advance guard. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lupino first, they'd eat him for breakfast. Or a snack. Ravens weren't picky. If they got hungry, they sometimes forgot to interrogate their prisoners. Even top spies like Lupino. Well, unless he really was a traitor. Obviously. Then they'd probably pin a medal on his chest. Dirty and bloody, Renato finally reached Lupino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Renato recognized the cards. It was Lupino's favorite deck. Oh, I thought you were in danger. I am. The Ravens are coming. Oh, the prison thing. Right, yeah, see, this guard owed me 53 ducats, so we made a deal. They're very reasonable people, actually, for weasels. Now, I got a brilliant plan to kidnap Zenobia. We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who happened to also be a deadly sorcerer, and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. And it would be nice to see her. He'd always had a soft spot for her. And he felt sure she had one for him. On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the transcendent Emperor had wrapped an armature around the eye of a god. Bernardo had already let that armature slip away to save Lupino's life. But even its core, the eye torn from a god, surely they could fashion a great weapon from that. The core of the Sky Ripper? Lupino's excited. That's an actual thing that we could just go and get. You've been busy. He sure had. Renato told him all the things he'd been up to. Soon they got to talking about old times, about wages they'd won and lost, and scrapes they'd barely got out of. It was good to be back with his friend. True, the core was capable of terrible, uncontrollable destruction. But this time, he was sure it would work great. It's beautiful here, thought Reynardo. It was nice to be back with his old war buddy. All right. Lapino was a traitor. But still, he was good company. I wonder what happens if I go that way. This chest contained a Vorpal sword. I'm just kidding. Vorpal swords don't exist. Well, they really needed to redecorate anyway. You almost never saw wild gogglers together like this. The toads had to train them not to peck each other to death. So these had to be imperial gogglers. That meant ravens were up ahead. Reynardo felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, but few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Reynardo smelled sick animals and dying ones. But Reynardo thought, maybe Lapino was right. Maybe they should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming here. Where did that go to?
That had gone rather well, actually.
This couldn't be good for global warming. So much. It was time to turn it into something he could use. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides. It wasn't healthy to be so close to the eye of a god. How could he use it? He could take it to the observatory. The scientists there could tell him how to harness its ancient power. But honestly, Renato ached to get away from it. He brought the core back with him to the Farfarer. But honestly, Renato ached to be rid of it. "Tell you what," said Lupino. "I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost." The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato. But what if Lupino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself. Trust me, Renato, you won't regret this. I'll treat the core like it was my own baby daughter. As the Farfarer dived towards the Nexus, Lupino was jumping up and down with excitement. "Stop rabbiting around," Renato said. Lupino just stared at him. The moment the ship landed, Lupino leapt off the ship. As Lupino vanished into the wilds of the Nexus, Renato vaguely remembered Lupino had a baby daughter, didn't he? And he told her mother he was going out to get some Easter eggs, and he'd never come back. But Renato was relieved not to carry the core anymore. He was already feeling better. And who knows, maybe this time Lupino would get it right. And if Renato could take the outpost, he'd have access to all the Empire's communications in this sector. Right? Building these platforms was so expensive, they'd run out of budget for guardrails. Or I could go that way, he thought. This jewel was more than sparkling. It had arcane power and an engraving. To Cindy. Renato caught his breath. His joints still hurt, but he couldn't feel the poison in his system anymore. He'd let the armature slip out of his hands to save his friend Lupino. Of course he had to let Lupino take the core. The rebellion needed every man doing his duty. And the rabbit would be no good taking on an Imperial outpost, right? Sometimes, Renato really hated inanimate objects. The rebellion's time was running out. The intel he would collect from the outpost would give the rebels a small edge in the final battle. But the real game changer was the core. And that was in Lupino's paws. Renato hated playing second fiddle. Renato took the outpost with a song in his heart. Soon, he was stuffing his sack with key messages from and to the fleet. Then the fire speaker toad chortled a new message. The observatory had been sacked by ravens. Lapino and all the scientists had been taken to the mountains. Why? Why had he trusted Lapino again? And now the Empire had the core. Renato hailed the rebel base to warn them. But their far speaker didn't crowd back. Was the base under attack too? What was going on at the base, but he knew what the ravens would do to Lapino if Renato didn't rescue him fast.
Well, actually, he wasn't exactly sure. It kind of depended on whether Lapino was a traitor or not. Renato just couldn't bring himself to believe that.
What are old friends for, if not to need rescuing every few days? Renato felt a twinge of doubt. Should he have gone to the base? No. Logically, wherever they'd taken Lapino was probably where they took the core, right? Oh, why couldn't Lapino have just, for once, not got himself captured? Was that too much to ask? He shouldn't be too hard on the rabbit. No, he meant well, and he was insanely brave. You had to admire that. Renato hoped his mother wasn't watching. Oh, they really ought to put a railing on this thing, he thought. Where were they holding Lapino anyway? There was no sign of him or the ravens who'd captured him. Just rocks and snow and the usual scouts. No sign of the core either. Was this a wild rabbit chase? Oh, trust Lapino to screw up even getting captured. But what was this rebellion for anyway? Well, Lapino was a useless goof, but he was a friend. If friends didn't matter anymore, what was the point of winning this war? Was dead tired. Then he was just dead.
His mother never let him wave his sword around at home. He guessed he was still compensating for that.
Thought about the intel he'd gathered from the outpost. Who would he bring it to? Who even had time to read it?
At the end of the mountain path, Renato came to a clearing. There was a campfire, raven feathers, and... oh... Lapino's lucky deck of cards. Well, that wasn't good. Renato hoped Lapino would not try to cheat his captors at cards. Ravens were much better than weasels at counting, and they had a very poor sense of humor.
Then, he saw what he had hoped never to see. Fresh scraps of rabbit fur. Ragged and bloody, Ravens would eat anything.
By Grabthar's hammer! Bernardo screamed at the sky. I will avenge you!
The rebels had assembled their fleet. Ahead, the clouds were dark with Imperial ships. If he could reach the Emperor before the rest of the rebels did, maybe he could settle this without too much bloodshed. He set sail, and the Farfarer shot forward.
Poor Lapino had never been a great warrior. The mad rabbit was good for a lark and a laugh. And a pint. The thought of ravens eating him made Reynardo furious. The way they were eating up the land. The way the Emperor was eating up the people with his new, bloodthirsty ways. He would make them all pay. The mysterious sword from the east made you so fast you could catch a fly with your chopsticks. If that's what you really wanted. Well, he'd always wanted to do that. He had given up every objective to save his friend. He had given up the armature, the core, the gem, and even Zenobia. He loved Lapino, he realized. And now the rabbit was gone. A hero looks out for his friends, even when they're gone. He would send Lapino an honor guard of ravens to serve him in the halls of the Valiants. He would avenge him. A very clever engineer named Elon Musk got to start making floating platforms. Not many people knew that. Cod, the lead raven. Finally, he reached the Emperor's ship. And there was Lapino, surrounded by ravens. He was alive! They'd eaten some other rabbit. "I'll save you!" he shouted with joy and flung himself at the ravens. "Aw, you shouldn't have," said Lapino when the last raven was down. Renato threw his arms around his best friend. "I had to come. I love you, man." "You really, really shouldn't have," said Lapino. And Renato felt a rather sharp pain in his back. As he collapsed, Lapino took the dagger out of Renato's back and wiped it off on Renato's sleeve. "Why, you always have to be the hero. Brave Renato, epic Renato, super sexy Renato, and I'm sick of it."
As Renato died, all he could think was, "Damn it, fooled again."
He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome. The book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again. Faster than before? And he fell. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renata knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert, as tempting as it was to explore ancient mysteries. There was a war going on. And also, his old friend Lupino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lupino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? The island was windswept desert. No one went there except ostriches and ostrich hunters. The Iblis Stone. It sounded ominous. It sounded powerful. If the Emperor was searching for it, it must be dangerous. And so, Bernardo went ostrich hunting. Every child could sing verses about the Sky Ripper, but ancient codices held hints of other things. A stone that ate souls, a ruby that drank blood, a jewel only a righteous man could give away. Were all these things the Iblis Stone? Long hidden in a buried temple? Another ancient item that was only resurfacing now? Drawn up from the deeps by the Emperor's horrific rituals?
The air here tasted bitter. The steps were too tall for a person. The entire place felt restless, like it had been vexed to nightmare under the dust, waiting for its hour to come around at last.
You how to fly.
The ravens were already here, cawing in frustration. They were still searching for a way in. Good. Then he hadn't come too late.